Today I'm going to talk with you about a concept that I use frequently in explaining children's behavior, especially children who have ADHD. It's a concept that I call the attentional threshold. It's something that we all have, that when something is presented to us that's above our attentional threshold, we'll find that interesting. If it's below our attentional threshold, we'll find that boring. Now, if the average child, let's say, has an attentional threshold set here, children with ADHD have an attentional threshold that's set here. In other words, much higher. So things have to be much more stimulating and interesting for them to pay attention. In other words, over their attentional threshold. Unfortunately, many school environments are below their attentional threshold. So when this happens, children typically have one of three ways to adapt. First, if something is presented to them that's below their attentional threshold, they just won't pay attention to it. We call these children distractible, inattentive. But it's simply that they're not attending to what we would want them to pay attention to because it's boring to them. And so they're thinking about something else. They're daydreaming. Their minds are elsewhere. The second way that children who have ADHD adapt when they're in an environment like a typical classroom that's below their attentional threshold is that they fidget and they squirm, they get out of their seat, they move around, they talk to their neighbor, all in an effort to artificially stimulate themselves, to bring themselves up over that attentional threshold so that they can pay better attention. We call these children hyperactive. Now, the last and perhaps most, let's say, problematic way that children adapt to an environment that's boring to them when they have ADHD is to misbehave in an effort to bring the entire classroom up to their attentional threshold, where they're feeling much more involved, oftentimes the center of attention. That attention may be negative attention, but it's attention nevertheless, which is a better experience than feeling like they are checked out. And of course, when children behave in this way, what do? We punish them. So I'd like you to stop and think about the types of behaviors children with ADHD engage in when they're in a setting like a typical classroom, a setting that's below their attentional threshold. They either misbehave, fidget and squirm, or space out. And when they do these things, when they behave in this manner, we typically use some way of redirecting, oftentimes punishing them for their attempt to adjust or to compensate for their problem. Now, stop and think about that. Does that make sense to you? That we are punishing them for their attempt to adjust to their condition? I don't think it makes sense. It doesn't make sense to me. And we wonder then why children with ADHD, particularly our children with ADHD, suffer from low self-esteem. It's no mystery. When they're constantly being singled out, when they're constantly being redirected, when they're constantly being punished for behaviors that are beyond their control, how could they feel anything but poorly about themselves? And they can't stop and tell us, well, wait a minute, you don't understand. I have an attentional threshold that's set too high, and that's why I'm misbehaving. They just misbehave. So it's really incumbent upon us, both as parents and as educators, to recognize that when a child has ADHD, it has significant ramifications for the way that they behave. It's not that we want to give a child who has ADHD a free pass. That, in other words, they can do whatever they want and they have ADHD, so that's an excuse. And some children actually will use that. But generally speaking, that's not the case. What we want to do then when we have a child or we're dealing with a child who has ADHD is to first ask ourselves the question, is this behavior under their control or not under their control? If it's not under their control, then they're going to need our help because typically it's because they've got ADHD. If it is under their control, and children with ADHD can misbehave like any other child, then punishment would be an appropriate intervention. But we first have to ask ourselves the question when a child has ADHD, is the behavior under their control or not under their control before we intervene? Now, this is one of the first concepts that I want to introduce you to through this video blog, and it's one I'd like you to take seriously, because if you do, a lot of the types of behaviors that you're seeing in your child or in your student become understandable. And as a result, your interventions with them will become more successful and you'll get better results as you work with such a child. So if you'll stay with me as we go through this journey together, each week I'm going to bring more and more information to bear. I'm going to help you understand and better ways to intervene with your child if your child has ADHD.